evening. Thanks for coming. I represent St. Paul's Episcopal Church, and we appreciate your attendance. We're here tonight. Dylan Hewlett, a brilliant pianist and mathematician, will entertain us. In 2013, he's a Douglas Anderson alumnus. He will share his passion for music of Schubert and Schumann. We will accept donations at the back of the church, which will be accepted in cash or online. And we don't want you to miss the piano romance evening that you're about to receive. In addition, you can receive this information on facebook.com at St. Paul's Jacksonville under live streams. You can also get it on YouTube. Search for St. Paul's Jacksonville and look for the live stream there. So if you will, join me in welcoming Dylan, and we thank you for your attendance here.
This piece is in 8 movements, and I'm glad to see you all are, trained in the ways of the classical Jedi. But it's quite a way to start a performance in terms of its intensity, its explosiveness, especially when you consider this piece is from 1838. This is not an avant-garde piece. This isn't from the 20th century. This is from 1838, and allegedly written in only 4 days by Schumann. The last movement in particular, which obviously we have to wait a little while to hear, was allegedly written in only 1 sitting in what Schumann called a white heat. One of the things that I want to do with this performance is make classical music, even this music that is extremely intense, extremely emotional, and occasionally foreboding and dwelling on these topics that are difficult to discuss, difficult to consider. I want to make that more approachable, and I think that a big thing to remember when listening to classical music is that even though we go to the symphony and we dress up and the musicians wear tuxedos and we wait between movements, this is not how the music was played by the composers themselves. Schumann and Schubert were romantics. These were people who lived very frequently difficult lives, drinking too much, sleeping around too much, dying very early, very frequently. Like this is Chopin. Schubert was only 31 years old when he died. So one of the things that I want to do with this performance is contextualize that and give you sort of a sense of what it would have been like to hear the music as it was played back then. That piece is the first movement of Schumann's piano cycle Kreiseriana. It is, as I say in the program, is studying contrasts. Generally, the first movements are more agitated, so 1, 3, 5. The odd movements are agitated. You have 1, 3, 5, and 7. They have a much more agitated feeling. You can see that reflected in the expression markings indicated in the program. The even movements tend to be the opposite. They tend to be more meditative. I won't say they're happy or carefree, but they are more melodic, a little bit maybe easier to listen to. There are breaks, as we heard in this one. The second theme relied on the same sort of rhythmic patterns, but had a more melodic feel. It was a little bit easier to listen to. It didn't have the same sort of intensity. And we'll see that in the second movement, the next movement. It is the longest movement. It's broken by 2 intermezzos, which sort of means what it sounds. It's just in the middle. Broken by 2 intermezzos of a significantly different character. And then the last 6 movements I'll play 3 at a time. And I'll have some more words about those movements after I play the second. Now, this second movement is not just the most melodic, but I think in terms of Schumann's history was the most important because it contains multiple allusions to themes, original themes written by Clara Wieck, who later became Schumann's wife. And in the many letters that he wrote to Clara over the course of writing this piece and over the course of getting the piece published, he said that she would see herself in it. And in particular, she would see herself in the second movement. And something happens in the second intermezzo that takes the theme that's introduced at the beginning, which is easily the most carefree that the music in this piece ever is, and it changes it so that when we return, something has changed, something is different. These are the things that aren't stated on programs, aren't technically musically oriented, but it's the sense that I get and the sense I'm hopefully going to be able to get across to you guys. So this is the second movement, and then I'll play the 3rd through the 5th, and then the 6th through the 8th. did the dress rehearsal on Thursday, I gave all of these remarks from the piano. And there are some people who can't be here. We want to capture it on a live stream. So that's why I'm coming up to the lectern. I don't want it to feel like a lecture. I want it to feel really conversational, maybe one-sided, but conversational nonetheless. Because again, this is intense music. We hear such melodiousness and real passion. And again, something happens in that second intermezzo that changes the way that we reflect upon the same thing repeated almost the exact same way for a third time. The first two movements of this piece I see as one-offs, which is why I'm giving remarks after the first and then after the second. But the last 6 movements I see as 2 connected parts. We have the next 3, the third, the fourth, and the fifth. They follow the same alternating pattern as before, but they're a little bit shorter, and they gravitate around the same tonal center of G minor. The same of the last 3. So I'll play the next 3 without any sort of pause, and I'll play the last 3 with any sort of pause. And what's so interesting to me about these 3 is the way that while they stand alone as independent movements, they also work very well as one movement. And so you have this sense of, a back and forth, almost a bipolar type of, sound. And, the DSM didn't exist in 1838. This is, this was almost a fiction for these people. So this is the next 3 movements, 3 through 5. So the term, or rather the title Kreisleriana, is a title that Schumann said would mean nothing to any but Germans. It's based on a character created by the author E.T.A. Hoffmann, who was an early Romantic author. In fact, maybe the first Romantic author. It's a character that he created for his 1815 novel, Fantasy Pieces in Hewlett's Manor. It was influential not just to Schumann, but basically to the entire Western world. Schumann in particular was particularly influenced by it and wrote a series of fantasy pieces only a few months before he wrote the Kreisleriana. And so in fact, they were just called fantasy pieces directly after E.T.A. Hoffmann. The character Johannes Kreisler, who's introduced in this section of Fantasy Pieces in Hewlett's Manor, titled Kreisleriana, is a Kapellmeister, which is an important job where you were the music director of a major cathedral. And the way that it starts is a description of how nobody knows what happened to Johannes Kreisler. It really sounds like some pulp mystery novel from maybe the 20th century, certainly. And as he describes Kreisler throughout the course of his 3 novels, we get more and more and more detail about him, but everything that we know is predicated on the fact that the first thing we learn is that he disappears and no one knows what happened to him. While Schumann did say, not just about this piece, but about other pieces that had literary titles as well, that he never named his pieces until after he'd finished writing them, it's impossible not to think of Kreisler in particular when you listen to the Kreisleriana. The biggest reason that that's the case is probably because Kreisler was himself described as what we might think of as an early bipolar patient. He would, in one moment, be extraordinarily gracious, writing beautiful choral music for his church, and the following morning, wake up, throw the papers in the fire, and attack his servants. And then, of course, eventually he disappears. But for me, and this is the sort of thing that I think only a very long time of playing the piece, reading about the piece, engaging with the piece, you would miss, but is really clear as day once you consider it. Not in Fantasy Pieces, but in another novel by Hoffmann, the next one, Kreisler is having a conversation with none other than his cat. And the cat, who is a learned cat capable of significant musical criticism and thought, I'm serious. The cat asks Kreisler, if you were to be any musical motive, instrument, piece, melody, what would you be? And Kreisler says, I'd be a basso ostinato. And if you don't, the basso is the same as in English. It's just the bass. It's low down in the register. And the ostinato rhythm is something which is repeated over and over with minimal variation throughout the course of a piece. And once we get to the 8th movement, I think you will hear a basso ostinato, which is almost unmistakably, for me, Kreisler. And at the end of the piece, but before it ends, it disappears. It vanishes into the depths of the piano. And it's sort of haunting when you realize that this is probably the Kreisler. No one knows where he went. No one knows where he's going. No one really knows who he is. And yet, he was sort of there all along. So these are the final 3 movements of Schumann's Kreisler.